Last May time we had our last update and we were looking at anti-Semitism, Israel and their gas, Israel and the Bible, and the growing trade between Israel and the UK and between Israel and India. What I want to concentrate on tonight are those verses which we read from Ezekiel 38. We must have read them hundreds of times, I suppose, and yet as we get closer and closer to the fulfilment of them, we see a shade of meaning in these particular phrases that are used, which is so exciting. But before we go any further, I just want to sort one matter out. It is important for us to realise that the Gogian invasion of Israel is not going to take place any time shortly. It's not going to take place this week, it's not going to take place next week. Because there is a life-changing event that has to take place before the Gogian invasion, before Gog, as we read there, comes down into the land of Israel. And that, of course, is the coming of the Lord Jesus to his household for judgment. And so it is important that we recognise that we shouldn't be looking for Gog, Russia, coming down into Israel as our sign that the Master is near, because that is going to take place some considerable time, I believe, after we have been called away to judgment. Now, this is a sequence of events which you've seen before, but let's just run through it again. I believe that the first event, as far as the household is concerned, is the return of the Lord Jesus and the call of the saints and the judgment of the saints. And at the same time, or shortly after that, is the Elijah work, which Malachi talks about. And it is at a time, as Ezekiel 38 was saying, when Israel will be exceedingly prosperous. And it is at that time that the evil thought comes into Gog's mind and he comes down against Israel. And Israel as a nation are broken, and that is the signal for Christ and the saints to come up and destroy the enemy who have come against Israel, which is what the book of Revelation terms the Battle of Armageddon, and is dealt with in the rest of the chapter and in Ezekiel chapter 39. And Christ's first work is to establish the kingdom with Israel, to turn Israel, the remnant that are in the land, to baptise them into Christ when they realise that Jesus is the Messiah, in the language of Zechariah chapter 12. And then there's a call to the Jews to come back to their land, and this is Elijah's second work in gathering the Jews while there is warfare in Europe, but eventually all nations do submit and the kingdom is fully established. Now, if we try to apply a tentative timeline, I'm going to be very brief on this, but I think we can perhaps see a period of time from his return to his household to his return to his nation in saving them, that dramatic overthrow of the Gogian forces, of a time period maybe of 10 years. And at what stage Gog comes down into Israel during that period, we can't be sure. It could be that Gog is established in Jerusalem for a year or two, and Israel in very great straits. And then the revelation of Jesus to the world is something that flows on after the saving of the Jews, as he establishes himself as King of the Jews and sends the everlasting gospel to the nations to say, look, I am the King, you must submit to me. And we know there's a long period of warfare, especially in Europe, who resist him. And so a time period from the Battle of Armageddon to the kingdom being fully established could well be 40 years, making a total period of 50 years. So the great clash at Jerusalem is something which lies some way away. The Master will have come, and there will be several years after that before Gog comes down. So the reason why I want to just emphasise that is that quite a few in our community are seeing in the conflict or potential conflict between Israel and Iran at the moment perhaps the beginnings of the invasion of Israel, that Iran will come down against Israel and destroy her. Well, that's not what Gog is talking about, or Ezekiel 38 is talking about. And as I say, the Lord Jesus has to come back before that can happen. And Israel has to be at a time when she is very prosperous before that invasion. So I want us just to look at some of the key verses in Ezekiel 38 and see why we can get excited about seeing these scriptures being fulfilled in our lifetime before our eyes. Things that brothers and sisters of past ages would have loved to have seen. And we have that privilege of seeing them beginning to come to pass. We won't see them in their completeness this side of the call to the judgment seat. But what is so interesting is that we can see great changes taking place. So when in Ezekiel 38 it talks about taking a spoil and taking a prey, art thou come to take a spoil, hast thou gathered thy company to take a prey, to take a great spoil, well, we can see that is the potential that is coming. We can see the great wealth that lies at the feet of Israel, both offshore and onshore. And great changes can take place with the prosperity that will bring. And incidentally, just today, Netanyahu has called for elections on January the 22nd. So he is obviously seeing that he needs to have a stronger mandate than he already has, though he has a pretty strong mandate, in order to proceed with his plans. And again, when we read these words in verse 10, thus saith Adonai Yahweh, it shall come to pass that at that same time shall things come into thy Gog's mind, and thou shalt think an evil thought. Now, we can begin to now see probably what that evil thought is. As Russia is prepared to ditch her support for her traditional allies, Syria and Iran to some extent, and pitch in with Israel because she sees what a valuable prize Israel has with all the gas and with all the oil. We'll develop that in a moment. And again, we can see that Russia is beginning to manoeuvre herself. So that when she does come against Israel, that will be an evil thought, because prior to that, she has shown herself to be friendly and helpful to Israel. So it will indeed be an evil thought when she comes against Israel. And again, when we read of the sequence of the countries who are opposed to this opposition, we read of Sheba and Dedan, followed by the merchants of Tarshish, followed by the young lions who are opposed to this coming of a great spoil. And that's something we've found difficult to understand. Why would Sheba and Dedan, and we take that to represent the Arab nations of Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, who've been opposed to Israel, why should they now, in this day, be in a position to say to Gog, why have you come against Israel? It shows us a changed relationship. And maybe, as we shall develop, if we see that Russia is changing her attitude to Israel, this can completely change the attitude of the other Arab nations, because traditionally Russia has been the one that has backed the Arab nations against Israel, supplying them with arms and that. If she switches sides and the others follow, then we can see this scenario. Sheba and Dedan opposed to what is happening. And then the merchants of Tarshish, and we read that as representing Britain, we see from that a bigger role for Britain in the Middle East than she has at the moment. And again, perhaps with the American elections and Obama being less interested in Israel, and we don't even know if he's going to win the next election, and Romney's an unknown entity, again we can see America still one of the young lions, still working in the region, still friendly with Israel, but not to the same extent. And maybe we can see the beginnings of Britain taking a new pathway and developing her trade with Israel and with the Middle East. So, as I say, we see these great changes, and we can now see the correct sequence, perhaps, of what Ezekiel had to say, and understand why he put Sheba and Dedan first, which is so surprising to us, but reflecting a new situation. And again, perhaps we can look in a slightly different role at another verse of, I will say, I'll go unto a land of unwalled villages, I will go to them that are rest and dwell safely and securely, all of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates. Now, if Israel does go against Iran, as it seems quite likely that will happen, and if Iran is humbled, then that would again change the situation in the Middle East. And a successful outcome against Iran would bring security, together with a changed situation. If Russia is now on Israel's side, that can make a big difference. And the surrounding nations can benefit from the economic advantages of working with Israel rather than against them. And if Hamas and Hezbollah are equally humbled, as they would have to be, then this would remove two of the great threats, and with Iran, three of the great threats that Israel faces. So we see these wonderful things, and we'll develop them now. But just before we do, let's just look finally at the list of the companions. We note that Persia is there, modern-day Iran, is top of the list. But it's top of the list, not of the main aggressors, it's top of the list of the companions of Gog. It's Gog that comes against Israel, it's not Iran that comes against Israel. She is one of those nations that join the bandwagon and work with Gog to come against Israel, but she's not the leader of it. And so I can see from understanding of the scriptures that Iran has to be curbed. She is wanting to be the aggressor here and now, but that's not God's plan and purpose. So she has to be curbed until the time is ripe. So these are the matters that we will explore, but I just want to take just one thing from Daniel chapter 2, which will deal with another aspect which we're not going to deal with, but it will just be helpful, I hope. The image that Nebuchadnezzar saw is about to stand on its feet. It has never stood up on its feet before. The constituent parts have been assembled over the millennia, but for one time and one time only, it stands upon its iron clay feet. And we can see that it is necessary for the nations to get into the right foot, as it were, the western foot or the eastern foot. And if we look at the division in olden times in the Roman Empire between East and West, which ran down through the Balkans, we can see that the country of Greece belonged to the eastern leg and not to the western leg. At the moment, Greece belongs to the EU and therefore to the western leg. And so we can see in the financial troubles that are sweeping Europe, the work of the angels to break Greece away from the Euro and eventually from the EU and align her with the eastern leg rather than the western leg. And it's interesting to see the role of Israel in the pulling of Greece away from the western leg. Traditionally, Israel was very friendly with Turkey. Great friendship, a lot of trade between the two countries until just 2 years ago. And now, because of the incident of the sending of the ships, the Mavi Marmara incident, Turkey has broken her friendship with Israel, and Israel has developed her friendship with Greece. Now that took place, the beginnings of that friendship, and we see how the angels work behind the scenes. The beginning of that friendship between Israel and Greece started in February 2010 with what the world will call a chance meeting, but we believe this was angelic hands. The former Prime Minister of Greece, George Papandreou, was in Moscow at the same time as Benjamin Netanyahu. And the pair of them happened to go to the same restaurant in Moscow one night, and they joined forces. And Papandreou said to Netanyahu, my country's in a terrible mess, but you've had experience of changing Israel from an economic basket case to a very successful country. Can you give me some advice? And from that chance meeting, a friendship developed. So that when in May time, the incident with the flotilla with Turkey, when that broke, the pathway, as it were, to this newfound friendship between Israel and Greece was formed. And as a result of that change of alliance, Israel became interested in southern Cyprus. As long as Israel was friendly with northern Cyprus, the Turkish side, she didn't have an awful lot to do with the southern side, which was Greek, because there was deep division between north and south. And so this breaking of the Turkish friendship and the development of the Greek friendship brought about Israel being much more interested in southern Cyprus. And of course there's a lot of oil and gas wealth there, and Israel has been helping Turkey to develop these things. And so Greece and Cyprus are being drawn towards Israel. At the same time, we can see Russia working behind the scenes to play an influence. She has been offering loans to both Greece and to Cyprus. And we can see the beginnings of the pathway which will draw both Greece and Cyprus from that western leg into the eastern leg. Now, we haven't time to develop that anymore. What I want to start with is to look at the fundamental change in the world of energy, because it has a great influence on world events and the situation to bring it about so that Ezekiel 38 gets fulfilled. Remember, the OPEC members, the original 6 OPEC members, used their influence in the time of the Yom Kippur War in 1973 and pushed up oil prices and brought havoc to the economies of the Western world. But since that day, OPEC's power has been draining away. And they've 2 great challenges to their influence and power. One of those is that the fact the world is waking up that it has vast reserves of shale oil and gas in many countries, vast reserves. And OPEC is being hit 3 ways with these oil shale developments. United States is almost on the pathway to being independent as far as gas is concerned, because she has so much gas in the shale that she has there. In Israel too, not only does she have these vast reserves off sea of gas, but she also has vast reserves of oil on land. And China too has huge reserves of oil, shale oil. Shale can be manifest in the form of oil or gas. And so these 3 challenges have had the effect of breaking the power of OPEC. The other threat is Russia herself. She has developed her gas and oil fields. She has the biggest gas reservoirs in the reserves in the world, and her oil reserves are number 2 to Saudi Arabia. Just lodge that in your mind. And a vast tentacle of pipelines links Russia to Europe, so that Europe is very dependent upon these supplies, and again reducing the effect of OPEC. So I just want to very quickly just see how the Middle East balance is changing because of these things, these four areas of impact. Just look at the United States. This was an article in the beginning of September. American shale growth threatens global energy independence. The growth of oil and gas exploration in shales began in North America is setting off a global race for shale exploration and production development, and threatens to turn the old conventional energy order on its head. Based primarily on the phenomenal growth of domestic energy production from shale exploration and production in the United States, the world is waking up to realise that we're not running out of oil or natural gas. Now, this pathway to independence, as far as America is concerned, is also having an effect on Russia. And this was an article last week, shale gas boom, how scared is the Kremlin? Gazprom should be scared. The US has overtaken Russia as the largest producer of natural gas, courtesy of the fracking revolution. The EU suddenly feels bold enough to rebel, and Moscow could very soon lose its grip on its European gas markets. In mathematical terms, the EU has rather belatedly decided that things aren't adding up, and that the Europeans are paying too high a price for Russian gas, and not benefiting at all from the natural gas boom in the US, which has boosted supplies and caused prices to drop significantly. While Russia is selling its gas for about $10 a unit, the US is selling the same for about $3. Another variable has also surfaced. The US has become self-sufficient in natural gas, and this has led other countries to shift exports of low-pressure natural gas destined for the US market to the European markets. The price of this non-Russian LNG is about half of what Gazprom is charging. And so you can see how that's having an effect not only on OPEC, but on Russia and her pricing system. As far as Israel is concerned, this is something we've been talking about the last few years, but just a few slides on this. There's a report in July, Israel's emergence as energy superpower makes waves. The emerging new energy picture in Israel has the potential to be one of the biggest news developments of the next 10 years. Potentially, the energy revolution and the change in Israel's outlook have more geopolitical implications than the Arab Spring. Many obstacles exist, and in a best-case scenario, some time must pass before the full consequences of the world's new energy geography make themselves felt. But if production from the new sources in Israel and elsewhere develops, world politics will change. And this is one from the Financial Times, end of August, Field of Dreams. The recent discoveries are so large and have come so swiftly that some Israelis are having difficulty adjusting to the new reality. Even hardened energy executives speak of a miracle when discussing Israel's natural gas story. With reserves of almost 280 billion cubic metres of natural gas, the Tamar field is a hugely valuable asset for the Israeli economy. Discovered in January 2009, it was the biggest gas find in the world that year, and by far the biggest ever made in Israeli waters. In December 2010, Tamar was dwarfed by the discovery of the Leviathan gas field, some 20 miles further east, the largest deep water gas reservoir found anywhere in the world over the past decade. The two fields, together with a string of smaller discoveries, will cover Israel's domestic demands for gas for at least the next 25 years and still leave billions of cubic metres for sale abroad. The government's take from the gas fields alone is forecast to reach at least $140 billion over the next 3 decades, a staggering sum for a relatively small economy such as Israel's. Well, that was what we looked at in May, except I've upped the Tamar field because that has increased. And since May, we have to add Shimshon, which comparatively a small field, but the pelagic field just off Haifa is another big field. And again, just to put it into its context, the UK's reserves of natural gas is 256 billion cubic metres. So even Tamar, one field in Israel, is bigger than the whole of the UK's natural gas reserves. And again, we've looked at the shale oil on land in Israel. Vast supplies there, estimated to be 250 million barrels of recoverable oil from this shale oil. Now, we said that Russia was number 2 to Saudi Arabia. Russia's oil reserves, depends what you look at, and I've eventually found a whole long list where somebody brought all the different estimates together, and it ranges from 60 to 200 billion barrels. So Israel potentially has got more oil than Russia. As we said, shale can be in the form of gas or oil as far as Israel is concerned. Very fortunately for her, it's in the form of oil, very sweet oil, very high quality oil, because she's got lots of gas off sea, so it's good to have oil on land. So what a game changer that is. And not only Israel, but Jordan. There was an interesting article just a week ago that Jordan too has similar quantities of shale oil to Israel. Now, Cyprus is on the brink of being another large gas supplier. The Israelis helped the southern Cyprus government to explore, and the Aphrodite well has got an estimated capacity of 144 billion cubic metres. And back in May, 15 firms from around the world, which was unheard of, nobody wanted to have anything to do with drilling for oil and gas off Israel and these waters, but now suddenly the whole world wants to get in on the act, and 15 firms submitted their bids. And just this week, the Cyprus government is evaluating those bids and is putting forward their recommendations to the government as to who they should pick to develop these oil fields and gas fields off Cyprus. One thing that Israel is keen to do is to export the gas that is there, not only off Israel but off Cyprus. Now, building gas pipelines is an expensive business. And so what Israel is planning to do is rather revolutionary, as so often the things that Israel does. So instead of laying expensive gas pipelines to Europe to ship the gas, you see, if they'd still been friendly with Turkey, they could have piped it up to Turkey and connected on with pipelines there, but with Turkey being as she is, that isn't a feasible solution. So what Israel is proposing to do, with the help of Cyprus, is to take the gas ashore, turn it into electricity through generating with gas turbines, and laying an electric cable from Israel to Cyprus, from Cyprus to Crete, and that's the third bit already exists. Crete is linked to Greece. And so the idea is, instead of exporting gas, you export the energy, the electricity, which Europe wants. And they hope that this Euro-Asia interconnector, as it will be called, will be up and running fairly soon. By 2016 is what they're wanting to do. Still a lot of money, 1.5 billion euros, but much less than laying gas pipelines. And they're hoping to lay a second set of cables to double that by 2020. It has been dubbed the most important, possibly the most important energy bridge in the world. Quick look at China, just one slide there. China's about 36,000 billion cubic metres of shale gas, which is more than America has. But you can see the vast quantities that are now being produced from shale with the new techniques that have come on board. So just the last link, those Russian pipelines. All of those pipelines, or virtually all on that map, apart from some down at the bottom, all are connecting Russia to Europe and taking oil, taking gas. In fact, just this week, the second of the undersea pipeline from Russia to Germany came on stream. Putin pressed the button, I think it was on Monday, so that now both the pipelines are flowing with gas into Germany. So with that as a kind of introduction, we're going to look at a bit more detail. Let's just have a look at some of the things that we looked at. Spoil, prey, silver, gold, great spoil. We can see that Israel is on the brink of great prosperity. There is a great spoil to be had. Now, when one looks at the Hebrew for thou shalt think an evil thought, it's an interesting little phrase. That word for think, as used here, is a primitive root, properly to plait or to interpenetrate, literally to weave, or generally to fabricate, figuratively to plot or contrive. So you can see all sorts of strings working together to form a rope, but in a malicious sense. So it's plotting, and the word for thought is a device, a plan, an intention. And my Brown's Driver Briggs translates thou shalt think an evil thought by thou shalt devise evil, hurtful device or plan. So what is being spoken of there is that Russia is playing a crafty chess game. She is prepared to be friendly with Israel, as we shall see in a moment, in order that at some later time she can play nasty. It will be an evil thought. You see, Putin went to visit Israel, didn't he, in June. When did Obama go to Israel? He's never been there. The reason Putin went to Israel was twofold. This was a report written at the time of his visit back in June. Russia seeking strategic ties with Israel to counter Islamic rise. The Israeli Institute for National Security Studies report, entitled Russian Policies in an Era of Change, asserts that Putin had been wooing Israel to establish a strategic alliance with Moscow. Moscow was looking to Israel and other Western-aligned states in the Mediterranean to counter the rising power of Islamic states, particularly Turkey. Also emerging is Russia's interest in promoting strategic cooperation with Israel, thereby establishing a new regional political axis with the possible inclusion of other nations. And when I looked at the report, it was Greece, Cyprus and the Balkans. Now, the other area that Putin was coming to Israel for was energy. Visiting Russians are seeking cooperation in energy and in space. The most important item raised between Putin and Netanyahu on Monday was an offer by Russia's state-owned energy company Gazprom to join in developing Israel's offshore gas reserves. The largest extractor of natural gas in the world and Russia's biggest company, Gazprom, wants to open a local subsidiary that will engage in drilling and offshore and onshore pipeline operations. So that was in June. This is a report at the beginning of September. Now, I'll warn you now, this is the longest quote I've ever done. It goes on for quite a few slides, but it is so interesting. And it's interesting, it was in a Canadian paper. We know that Canada has very strong links to Israel. The Prime Minister is very pro-Israel. But just look at the implications of what is here. For over 30 years, Israel tried swapping land for peace with its Arab neighbours. Those wishful political plays didn't work out so well, but Israel's latest foray, a hard-headed deal with Russia for cash and future considerations, holds more promise. In this unfolding new deal, Israel parts with a share of its lucrative offshore gas field in the Mediterranean, while Russia parts company with Israel's enemies in Syria and Iran. Russia secures quite separate gains. Win-win for Israel and Russia, lose-lose for Israel and Russia's various rivals. This unfolding deal promises to be a diplomatic and business masterstroke for both parties, and shows how, when the energy business is at play, geopolitics is often the driver. Today, Russia faces two new threats to its hegemony over the European market. Exports of gas to Europe from Israel's vast offshore finds in the Mediterranean Sea, and continental Europe's own finds in the form of enormous shale gas reserves. Enter Gazprom Israel, a proposed subsidiary of Russian government-owned Gazprom, the world's largest natural gas company. According to reports in the Israeli and Eurasian media, the Israeli government has agreed to give the Russians a stake in the Mediterranean find, and also to increase the amount of gas allowed to be exported. With this deal, Russia would be cutting itself into any sales of Mediterranean gas to Europe, or, possibly better from Russia's point of view, it could persuade Israel to instead sell Mediterranean gas to Asian markets. Either way, Russia would retain the dominant role in Europe that underpins its national pride. As for Israel, the benefits of aligning itself with Russia's economic interests would be immense. Over the past half-century, Russia and Russian arms have been a mainstay of Arab nations and Muslim terrorists that sought Israel's destruction. In recent years, Russia's attitude toward Israel has become more nuanced, partly because Russia wants Israeli intelligence on Islamic terrorists targeting Russia, partly because Russia wants Israel's state-of-the-art arms, such as the unmanned aerial vehicles. 2 years ago, the two countries signed a military cooperation agreement, followed by a sale of Israeli UAVs to Russia. It was also followed by Russian willingness to withhold arms sales to Syria and Iran that would undermine Israel's military supremacy, such as the $1 billion sale to the Iran of Russia's much vaunted S-300 anti-missile system. I said it was one quote. With Israel becoming a major energy exporter, able to upset Russia's dominant role as a gas supplier in Europe, Russia is tilting further in Israel's direction and further from Israel's enemies. And with Russia and Israel jointly developing resources off Israel's shores, Israeli gas fields will benefit in part from a Russian shield. Belligerents who have been menacing Israel's drilling rigs and other energy infrastructure, they include the government of Turkey as well as Islamist terrorists in Israel's neighbouring countries, will now think twice before an attack that could draw Russia's ire. In jointly exploiting Mediterranean gas, Russia stands to gain diplomatically, Israel stands to gain militarily, and both stand to gain financially. They say politics makes for strange bedfellows. Geopolitics can make for sound businesses. End of quote. Here was a report, that was the beginning of September. Here was a report fortnight ago, Battle over Israel's Newfound Riches, and this is from somebody from the Department of Israeli Studies. Israel has a Russian Academy of Sciences. And what he said was, Israel doesn't have enough experience in the field of gas exploration. Although the US might be a leading oil expert, it is still in its infancy when it comes to gas. Russia, on the contrary, has much to offer. It boasts vast expertise and the necessary infrastructure able to turn this project from fiction to reality. Still determined to maintain its positions in the Middle East, Russia might be seeking to forge an economic alliance with Israel that could develop into a political union. Well, just like in Old Testament times, we can see that Russia is trying to forge alliances with the neighbours around her. And it might bring temporary peace, it might bring temporary prosperity. But Scripture has told us that the time is going to come when Russia will think an evil thought. And any agreements that she has made in this matter to share things with Israel will suddenly turn around and she'll want them all for herself. And no wonder God calls this time of peace. We've looked at this several times before, but in Ezekiel 39 we know that God through Ezekiel looking back and says, well, this time of peace and prosperity for Israel is a time of trespass in my sight, because they have trusted not in God but in themselves, and that's why they've got to have their power broken and to make them remember their God. So if our timetable is correct, then this period of prosperity and friendship between Russia and Israel, and which will affect the whole relationship of the Arab nations with Israel, bring about the changes that Ezekiel talks about, then this all lies after the Lord Jesus has come back. And it's not difficult to see, and again we've talked about this before, that part of that work when the Lord Jesus comes back, is for Elijah to go and stir up the religious Jews in Israel, and there is a growing number of God-fearing Jews looking for a Messiah to come and not knowing who that Messiah is. But if Elijah is successful in stirring up the religious parties in Israel at this time, then one can see that that will stir the hostility of the nations. The nations don't like the Jewishness of the state of Israel. And if Israel acts against churches and mosques, then you can see a rallying cry, let's come against them. And Russia will be thinking her evil thought and say, yes, this is my opportunity to take all this wealth for myself. That's why this verse is so interesting, seeing this changing role. First of all, it's Sheba and Dedan, and then the merchants of Tarshish, and then the young lions who are protesting. And a lot has got to change in order to bring Sheba and Dedan on side with Israel. At the moment, the big threat to Israel is Iran. This is splitting the Middle East. We know that Iran is Shiite and the rest are mainly Sunni, and there's deep divisions between the two sides. And the moderate nations hate Iran and what she stands for. And the Arab Spring hasn't made matters any easier for the Arab nations. It has fragmented them more. There's more trouble. They're less united than they were. But one of the effects of the Arab Spring has been to bring Saudi Arabia to the fore as the dominant power in that region. We believe that Saudi Arabia will be the one under Sheba and Dedan that will be friendly to Israel in this day. There have been several articles over the years about an unofficial cooperation between Israel and these moderate countries. The people, the Arab street, hate Israel, but the leaders look at things through different eyes. What is important in their eyes is to hang on to their position of power. They've seen so many leaders go, and it was a great shock to them when America abandoned Mubarak and allowed him to be overthrown. And so the leaders are looking to see ways of securing themselves. And at the moment, they see Iran is not only just a threat to Israel, but as a threat to their own thrones. So it is understandable how behind the scenes the nations are prepared unofficially to work with Israel on intelligence matters at the moment, but I think if we see Israel going against Iran and breaking her power and breaking Hezbollah and Hamas, then they will be happy to work with Israel. And Israel has a strange, I don't know quite how to put this, but the very fact that in the middle of Jerusalem is the Dome of the Rock, which is the third most holy site to the Muslims, must be, in a little way, a sense of protection for Israel. Because imagine the uproar there would be if Iran did fire a missile and smash the Dome of the Rock in hitting Jerusalem. What an uproar there would be among all the nations around. So it's one of those bizarre little protections for Jerusalem, I think, at the moment. We know that there are these hidden alliances, and there was one just on Sunday, wasn't it, the 7th. Unspoken alliance, Israel and the House of Saud. Experts say Saudi Arabia is not being entirely forthcoming when it comes to relations or even just strategic cooperation with Israel. On the one hand, Saudis feel threatened by Iran's nuclear program and Iran's hostile rhetoric, so they might turn a blind eye to an Israeli strike that uses Saudi airspace to reach Iran. On the other hand, supporting an Israeli attack on a fellow Muslim nation will provoke an outcry among the Muslims. So you can see the problems that they have. But obviously the wishes of the leaders and the strengthening their positions is going to be foremost in this contest. We know that Ahmadinejad is forthright in his condemnation of Israel. He was at the United Nations more recently, but what he said at this Quds Jerusalem Day address on the 17th of August, which is the last day of Ramadan, the very existence of the Zionist regime is an insult to humankind, an affront to all world nations. Confronting Zionists will also pave the way for saving the whole humankind from exploitation, depravity and misery. And his Brigadier General had this to say, that if the Zionist hooligans embark on practicing their verbal threats, they will provide the best opportunity for the destruction of Israel, because then the forged regime will be wiped out of the map and thrown into the trash bin of history forever. Now, of course, we know that that is not going to happen. And as I say, very much like the boastings of the Assyrians in times past, that isn't what God's plan is. Now, Iran wants to be a dominant power. She has a lot of influence in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in Iraq, in Syria and in Lebanon. And she wants to spread that power through Hezbollah and Hamas to take over the whole region. But that's not her role. Scripture marks out she's not the leader, she's only a companion of Gog. So she has to be curbed until that time comes. And so if Israel, as I say, is successful in curbing their power, then we can see that this development can take place of Israel dwelling securely without walls, having neither bars nor gates. It's interesting how Obama has done his best to stop Israel going against Iran. At least he wants it stopped until the American elections. He doesn't want to rock the boat. It looks as if Iran's about a year away from being successful in developing a weapon. Israel and Britain and America have been sabotaging plants, and just recently there was quite a setback. But Iran is pressing ahead. She's using everything she can. At the moment, there's a great feeling of hostility in Iran because their currency has absolutely plummeted. Its value has gone down and down and down, making all imports extremely expensive. There is a groundswell against Ahmadinejad at the moment, and it looks likely he is due to his term of office finishes, I think, next March or April. He may be booted out before that time comes, but we know not. At the moment, the world is expecting Israel is going to act. And remember that in the middle of September, an armada of British naval power massing in the Gulf as Israel prepares an Iranian strike. Well, there was naval power there, but it was mainly American naval power, but this was written by the Telegraph, so British slant on it. An armada of US and British naval power is massing in the Persian Gulf in the belief that Israel is considering a preemptive strike against Iran's covert nuclear weapons program. And 25 nations all came together with an unprecedented show of force as Israel and Iran moved toward the brink of war. So it was a 12-day exercise. So that exercise has now come and has now gone. It was interesting that a lot of the ships are still in the region. The two huge American aircraft carriers are still on site. If Israel goes against Iran, God can protect Jerusalem. We know in the long term Israel has got to be destroyed. But in the short term, if it is God's will, Israel can be successful. She has got the technology to go against Iran. And isn't it interesting that it is against this background of an expectation that Israel is going to go against Iran that Russia has chosen to choose just this time to begin this pathway of friendship with Israel. In other words, she sees that the spoil in Israel is worth more than the benefit she gets from working with Syria and working with Iran. She's prepared to give up those friendships in order to build on the Israeli one. And it's interesting how Russia sent all those naval vessels, didn't she, in September time I think it was, from all parts of the world, steaming into the Mediterranean to go to Syria, and suddenly they all stopped. And they dispersed and went their ways and didn't go to Syria. And Russia has withdrawn all her troops from Syria. So it looks as if this change of attitude is already taking place. And so Iran has to be curbed until the time is right for her to join in an alliance under the leadership of Russia, not under her own leadership. So what about Britain's position? There's an interesting article in the Times back in August. As the US increasingly draws more of its energy needs from the Americas, a geopolitical revolution of our times, the UK may increasingly have to manage the Middle East defence alone. At present, we simply cannot do it. England expects that every man will do his duty. Wake up, Prime Minister, and do yours before it's too late. There's war on the wind, can't you smell it? And this was an appeal from this writer in the Times, that because America is going to get less and less interested in the Middle East as her need for the oil from the Middle East dries up as she has her own supplies, Britain is realising that she must play a stronger role in the world. You can't have two big cuts on your navy and army. She must rebuild again. So we see perhaps the tide just beginning to turn as far as Britain and Israel is concerned. And it's interesting how, as the merchants of Tarshish, this is what Britain is doing. She gave up being a merchant because she was so enamoured with the EU. She's now realising she's got to go back to being a merchant power of trading around the world with her Commonwealth countries. And so she's starting to rebuild those links. And the trade between the UK and Israel is one of the target markets, and it is growing. The total value of trade and services between Britain and Israel is now well over $8 billion a year. Britain is now Israel's largest export market after the US. And Israel is a remarkable success story for British exporters. And in fact, there have been a series of initiatives to build trade between Israel and the United Kingdom. This one was back in June, Innovate Israel 2012, which was hosted in London. It was one of Europe's largest high-tech conferences aimed at enhancing the strong connection between the UK and Israel in innovation. It was attended by over 500 business leaders, investors, decision makers and government representatives. And that was followed by another one, Text Change. This is a report in September, It will bring the spirit of Startup Nation to UK investors and corporations. Israel's got the technology, Britain has the markets, or at least access to them. Why not bring the two together, letting British companies get access to Israeli startup technology to bring new top products and services to existing and new markets? I think, as we said before, what Britain is saying to Israel, why go to America? There's about a 10, 12-hour time lag difference there, so you've got to work through the night to deal with them. Why not come to Israel? Only 2 hours difference, not a million miles away, easy access. Come and develop your markets with our help. And, you know, this is the right way, and God can prosper the nation if it now is turning towards Israel and the Commonwealth. Because under Labour, the EU was everything. And the Commonwealth was nothing. Absolutely thought nothing of the Commonwealth. Whereas under the coalition, under Cameron and Hague, the EU, well, it has a role, but the dominant thinking now is we must develop the Commonwealth. And how interesting, the Queen at a Christmas speech pushing the Commonwealth. At the Jubilee celebrations, the Commonwealth was being pushed again. And at the Conservative Party conference this week in Birmingham, Hague gave a brilliant speech, well worth watching. And there's just an extract from it. Commonwealth offers enormous opportunities. Mr. Hague said it was vital more was made out of the UK links to the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth is an amazing network in a world that now consists of networks. The opportunities that arise from being a member of a great diverse network are enormous. Mr. Hague added it was extraordinary that natural allies in the Commonwealth had been taken for granted before, and said the UK could work with them, not on just foreign policy objectives, but also cyber security and campaigns against sexual violence. The collective GDP of the Commonwealth is about $10 trillion. It covers about a quarter of the landmass of the world and is home to nearly a third of the global population. Now, the main Commonwealth countries, Britain as the old lion has young lions. America is the oldest of the young lions. It was in 1776 she became independent. Canada became independent in 1931. Australia was older in 1901, and India in 1947, New Zealand 1907. And the interesting thing is that all these Commonwealth countries are interested and friendly to Israel. Because of Britain and the Bible, and the hope of Israel, it has brought with it this responsiveness that Israel has a special place in God's plan and purpose. And only Britain fulfills the role of a merchant power as a head of a family of nations, maritime powers, world trading nations, all friendly to Israel, and all working in the Sheba Dedan region. All those nations are very active in the Middle East, not only with Israel. And there's no other nation on earth that fits the description of the merchants of Tarshish having young lions. And so, brothers and sisters, this is my last slide. Jesus gave signs to his generation. He said, when these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. And we, brothers and sisters, have got so many signs, because we are living in the end of time, and the kingdom's about to come. There are so many things happening which we can see with our own eyes. And we have to lift up our heads. Our redemption is much nearer than when we were first baptized. The Lord Jesus can literally come back at any time, brothers and sisters. So let's take encouragement from the signs of the times and look and long and pray that our Master might be here, that the rest of God's plan and purpose might unfold, and this earth be turned into the paradise that God intended at creation. Thank you.
you.